Welcome, everybody, to this lean coffee discussion with Jason Little. We'll be talking about scaling lean change in the real world. Hashtag scaling change, if you want to tweet some stuff on Twitter. Jason, give us some background how this whole idea started, having this talk. I think you and Kelly connected a while back.
Yes. So we had done another Happy Melly online talk that was live, actually. And I think I sent out the link through the newsletter to the recording for people to check it out. And Kelly replied and with some interesting challenges that seem to be universal with any company that has more than one person. So we thought it would be cool to have a follow-up with ideas. You know, we see a lot of stuff in the Agile community around how do we scale things, and usually that comes down to what framework are you going to choose. So how are you going to copy and paste this framework onto your existing org? But it doesn't really work that way. It sounds non-committal, but that type of large change seems to evolve the way it's going to evolve. And the frameworks, they might provide some good guardrails and things like that, but there's how do you make small little slices of experiments here and there in bigger organizations to help guide it to where it wants to go, irrespective of whatever your favorite framework is. So we thought this would be an interesting discussion.
Kelly, fill us in. What grabbed your attention from the initial Happy Melly call, and what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Well, I think the key from the Happy Melly call was, scaling, and we're facing that as well. My name's Kelly Schultz. I'm from a large telco down under. How's that? And we have some challenges. We're strategically moving some great stuff to cloud, and I'm part of that process. We're embracing Salesforce, which is my background. But our organization is built largely on-premise applications and so forth. And so some of these very quick, agile, fast applications are hard to hook into some of the existing stuff because the existing stuff is built on a lot of waterfall process. So we're struggling. But we're also pushing forward at such a rapid rate. We've already scaled. We have 3 parallel streams, and we're getting there. We're not necessarily adopting any particular one method of scaling. I think they've looked at a lot of different ones and taken pieces that they like from each, and they've named it their own, which potentially has its fallbacks as well. But I guess what I've seen, it looks mostly safe. If that's not an oxymoron, I'm not sure. But we're definitely in that infancy stage, and I've not really been at this level of scale before. And yeah, this is not my first rodeo in projects in any state, but I've been around enough to know the wisdom of knowing that you don't know it, and it's scaring the hell out of you.
Yeah. So I don't know, Jason, do you want to respond to that, or do other people, David, Stefan, Mike, want to join in with what brought them to the call and what issues they're dealing with? What do you think?
So I'm happy to pitch in if that's okay. So I'm David Morris. I'm just setting up an enterprise agile coaching team with Fiserv, obviously a large fintech organization based in the US, but with some branches here in New Zealand as well. I've worked with, in consultancy roles, I've worked with a number of organizations that are facing these challenges of not just using agile at team levels, but working at scale, and the impact and ramifications that has on the rest of the organization. The opportunity I'm facing with Fiserv is, it's on a much bigger scale for me, certainly with 24,000 employees around the world. So for me, this is stepping up probably 2 or 3 gears in terms of applicability. and I'm sure to see new challenges and new opportunities in that. I've worked at Fiserv before, so I'm aware of some of those challenges. But yes, really, really keen to hear other people's experiences and share, I guess, some of the things that I've seen, but particularly to look at how I engage with the perception of scaling and the applicability of lean in US organizations, because I've not worked directly in the US. So that's me.
Stefan, what's your experience?
Well, for me, I'm not so sure what the question is, but while I'm working with people and with organizations, so and I had some experiences, but not so much with lean change management, and so I'm here to check in and to learn a little bit. Just wanted to connect more, so, and to see what's happening.
Thoughts, Jason?
The interesting thing for me, I'm working with 2 large organizations now, and that would be number 5 and 6, or 4 and 5, or 5 and 6 of with. And so each of these we're talking over 40,000 people, either telecom or banking space. And the patterns always seem to be the same. It's getting overwhelmed by that size. So if you look at a city that has that many people in it, and what happens in that city, it's comprised of smaller neighborhoods that are kind of self-contained neighborhoods that can manage commerce that comes in and out of certain areas of the city. It's governed by a mayor or a leader, of course, but what we try to do in our organizations is we try to have the mayor, or in our case, that centralized enterprise agile person, create everything that needs to be done and push it out to all the different neighborhoods. And I think it's just because organizations, they get overwhelmed. I don't know how many times a day I hear, we're a big X, we can't do that. We're a big telecom, we can't do that. We have 12 PMOs, we have to have a centralized framework. And I don't believe that's the case. I believe that we really need to understand how our teams link into the larger organization. Because I'm working with one division in a large bank right now that's pretty much separate from the rest of the mothership, if you will. There are certain things around how they're governed that's common between what this group is doing and what other groups are doing. But there's a lot of things that aren't. There's a lot of things that the teams in this group can do on their own without kind of falling into this type of pattern. So this is, what you typically see is you get an enterprise group that creates a bunch of things and processes and tries to push it into all these different divisions and try to standardize it. When I believe what they really need to do is to just move to a different model. I'll explain this when you see it, but move to more of a model where, sure, we have a group who is a support group, but they're really sort of linking different divisions to each other, so to speak. So instead of being like the central group that creates something, like I see lots of things in the old picture here where, this division is responsible for certain things. So they go into the enterprise group and create the list of standards and documents that this other group has to adhere to. Whereas, why don't these two groups just kind of meet once a week and figure out what they need from each other? So I don't know how many times I've seen instances where you want to talk to that Agile team and you get a form thrown in your face. So, or, the enterprise team has 7 different people you have to talk to just to run an Agile project. So they kind of take on the same structure and the same values as the old organization that we're actually trying to change. So you have to contact somebody to set up your JIRA license. You have to contact somebody to set up your intake form. You have to call somebody to do the training. You have to call somebody to find you a coach. You have to call somebody else. And we use the exact same structures that we're trying to change with Agile, because we run into the, well, we're a big whatever and it has to work this way. Now you got these poor teams where they have to deal with all the old world things, and now they have this Agile mosquito buzzing around their head, and they're like, just, I'm trying to deliver, get away from me. So I think by not getting overwhelmed by scale, and trying to figure out which divisions in our big company are pretty much independent, that let them run, let them do whatever they need to, as long as they're adhering to certain things that matter in the enterprise. So if anybody's worked in any highly regulated industry, there are certain external constraints that are real constraints. But not everything. There's a lot of internal constraints that we impose on ourselves in big companies through different watchdog groups. So how do we separate that external stuff that matters? Like in banking, for example, you're talking OSFI, you're talking SOX compliance, you're talking those other things that matter. But the internal stuff, did you fill out the right checklist for your project form? Some of that stuff doesn't matter. And I think we need to figure out, how do we balance the two of those?
It mattered to somebody at some point because they created it.
Yeah.
And whether it's to claim a territory or set up a boundary or a guardrail, there's a reason there, right? So how do you cross those boundaries without being threatening, right, of the group or function that set it up, so that you can begin to collaborate in the way you need to do it? I'm curious if anybody has figured that out, even at a small scale, and possibly that small scale informs how you do it at a larger scale.
I spent a lot of time trying to convince people who are trying to do Agile change to not change something. So who does that today? How do you solve that problem today? If you don't fill out this form, who do you get yelled at by, and who do they get yelled at by? So I spend a lot of time being a bridge builder by trying not to add something else that teams need to deal with. I mapped this out today. I can't show the picture, but there are 21 different threads of interactions between the delivery teams in one organization I'm working with and quote unquote Agile things. So there's I'm up to 5 different vendors who are all doing some type of Agile coaching or consulting or assessments or whatever it is, and a whole bunch of forms from a centralized group that's creating a bunch of Agile governance for teams to deal with. And then there's all of the independent hierarchies. So some director needs a different Agile report from this other director for this other person. And by the time you end up with mapping this stuff out on a wall is, I find, fascinating, because you get to visualize all the different communication threads that are happening. And then you look at it and you go, you can show that to the leaders and say, here's why you can't deliver anything. Out of an 8-hour day, teams have 7 hours dealing with, the VP of toilet paper and the VP of gravel and the VP of pens. And they can't get anything done because they're filling out like 50 surveys a day and all this stuff. If you can visualize that stuff on a wall, it becomes real that we don't really have a scaling problem. We have an alignment problem.
So one of the
naked husband.
You're on the air, man. Bring him in. Delivered. So the thought that came to my mind, Jason, was just present. You visualize things, right? You visualize the system and allow the system to see itself. And quite possibly in that they begin to see the absurdity, or at least they see the bottlenecks in a way that maybe they haven't seen it before. I don't know if it helps them decide to dismantle it or build bridges or blow up half the stuff that they had. I don't know what happens next, but I like that idea of visualizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I concur. A very recent example, you can understand release management it's a bit of a waterfall train that, given all of the moving pieces within a very large organization, release management is fairly standard and very process driven, very heavy in terms of making sure you fill out those forms and get things done on time. And they're in their schedule and they're very fixed in their approach. If you've done some work with design thinking and just general agile, you encourage the use of prototyping to be able to validate the stories that you're hearing, move the conversations along in a faster sort of lean approach. I'm working with a release management team who don't have the concept of prototyping, and so they quite literally, with the thing that we're prototyping, requires us to integrate to an existing system. So it has to go through release management, but we're not taking it all the way through to production. We're only taking it through to the first level of test, and they don't even have anything like that as part of their system. And I sit in the release management meetings because, you know, your town mayor requires you to attend those meetings, and I put together my case. And they look at you as if this is something entirely novel and it doesn't fit into our processes. It doesn't fit into the way we work. But at least I've made my case. And to be honest, because a lot of the leadership in those areas have been, I guess, being encouraged to get on the agile journey, but I was one of the first ones in the pipeline. So I'm one of those novel scenarios, and they actually, I confess, tried to work with me. And so that's a great feeling. But we don't know how to work with each other at this particular stage because we're still having to conform to the existing patterns. But we're at least embracing that we have to do something differently, that you can't, the overheads that are required to go on the usual journey are not applicable here. We need to find some cheaper and more elegant and efficient options to be able to support the concept of prototyping, because we're going to throw some of this away. And you can't invest in a massive amount of overhead in a prototype that you potentially will fail fast and you will abandon. So that is one of the challenges that I'm currently faced with. It's an interesting challenge, and am I up for it? I hope so. But those are the sort of things that every large organisation dealing with existing town councils that are waterfall based will be faced with going forward. It's a very hard thing just to walk up to your government organisation and say, you know how you're currently doing everything that you're doing now? Well, I don't fit that mould. You need to create something different for me. And they'll say, go away, mosquito. So those are the sort of things that I'm faced with sort of on a daily basis. And to the point now that we're being encouraged to create our own town council so they can work with us. Which the overhead for creating governance frameworks around what we're doing defeats the purpose of trying to remain agile and trying to remain lean. So you can feel the sucking vortex.
It's understandable. It's almost like if you've worked as an agile coach in a large organization before, the demand management is really difficult. It's, you know, I could go 2 days and nobody will email, call, pop by the team room for help, and then the next day you've got 17 meetings from people that want coaching support. So it's sort of like the the service, we're a service group. And I think a lot of times when companies create these centralized groups, PMOs being a good example, or HR, or any of these other groups that are designed to serve the organization, they're still governed the same way that product delivery parts of the organization are governed. And what I mean by that is there's measurements and performance mandates for the divisions and the groups that run the business, who make money and support existing products and get new customers, whatever the context is. And then there's a bunch of groups that support those groups. Using the same kind of approach for performance management is, I've seen situations where, the Agile coaches, you're measured on getting 40 projects to run Agile,
Right.
which forces them to push into divisions that might not be ready, because it has to be fair. It has to be standardized across every single person in this 80,000 person organization. You all have to be measured the same way, so it's fair, which is not correct. The ultimate measure for me is very simple. How valuable has your interaction been with the Agile coach from 0 to 10, and why? And that's it. And then if somebody, whoever's signing my paycheck doesn't like that, then they can get rid of me. But forcing me into a behavior that forces me to push and standardize things outwards, I think is where we run into the problems. We try and we don't consider what a lot of groups inside of organizations are service groups, release management being one. And I've seen instances where a large organization let teams go ahead and, hey, you want to try Agile? Go ahead, go run for it. Here's some budget you can use to pay for coaches. Go do whatever you want. And then when we got to 20 teams, it was these poor centralized ops and release teams that really got stuck, because now they have 20 different processes. So what do? They clamp down harder on making it more difficult for teams to release, and they want to push out a standardized process that doesn't work with all these 20 teams. So when you get into those dynamics, you're into a structural problem and an organizational design problem. So that centralized release team, maybe they shouldn't exist. Maybe they should be merged with the teams, which creates another problem. So we're kind of, when we try and scale things, we're really trying to trade off bigger problems for more manageable, smaller problems, because they're never going to go away, right? You move from a project focus to product and teams and value streams. You just change a bottleneck from centralized project stuff to now how are you going to coordinate between product lines? Mm-hmm. And as well, they'll be independent. Well, I would argue anybody who says that's never worked in a big organization, because you have to change the whole way things are funded. You have to look at CapEx and OpEx systems. You have to look at different ways that different divisions approach budgeting. And you're going to walk into the CFO's office and say, hey, let's move to product lines and value streams, right? Like, it's taken us in one organization 4 months just to get a list of teams in this one division. Because again, we have 5 different project tracking systems, and everybody's creating a different Excel whenever their boss is asking them for a list of projects. So where those aren't Agile problems, those are, I don't even know what problems they are, but I've seen every big company has the same problem. There's 23 Excel files with a list of projects, and none of them are right. There's the official CFO list of budget codes, what people are charging their time to, which we know is not right. So I saw an interesting project where in the bottom right of the spreadsheet, they're just trying to get the number down there to 0. So they're filling the list with people who aren't even working on the project, because they can get, oh, well, Kelly has 5% availability. She's not even in this division. Yeah, but if in our project management system, she's showing 5%, so we'll stick her on this. Oh, crap, now we're at -3%. And we know it's nonsense, but how do you change that nonsense? When there's potential?
I'm with you. Jason, hold up your design again, please.
Which one?
The before or the
that one?
Yeah. The before. The before. Yeah. So we can't probably see it while I talk, but imagine that each of those divisions have their own funding model, in that they have to validate or expense themselves back to the larger organization. It's early, my brain's not functioning, but so if Division 4 needs to talk to Division 2 and you want to do it in an agile manner, Division 4 reaches out to Division 2, bypasses the other sort of method, because Division 2, in order to reconcile their way of working or their funding within the organisation, Division 2 says, you can't talk to me unless you have a code.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah, I've seen it.
My drama.
Yeah, I went through that too. Yeah.
Yep. So breaking down those barriers makes the agile way of working very difficult. Very difficult.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your experience.
A team wanted to charge another team $25,000 to attend their stand-ups. So we have to account for our time somewhere. We're on an 8-month program together and you're making me come for 15 minutes for 2 people. That adds up to X. That's 25 grand. Here's your invoice. And the other project team said, well, forget it. And they just chose not to talk and went into the game of schedule chicken at the end. So who's going to make it? Who's not going to make it? We're not going to get the integration. And what eventually happened? The date slipped. Everybody got in a room. They yelled at each other for a while. They picked a new date, went through that again, and eventually they released. And how do you change that with a process? How do you change that with a scaling framework? How do you change that by telling people to be more agile? Sometimes it's just exposing that risk sooner. I talked to a VP a couple of weeks ago who was, not pleased that his money is being spent for people on the IT side to learn agile because it's his budget, right? IT is a cost center. So he's got a X millions of dollars that he's spending and IT is using it and it's costing him. So I'm trying to be as vague as possible so I don't get in trouble. But it's a valid concern, right? You've got this poor guy who is stuck having to do a big technology migration because 50 years of mainframe debt. Now we're kind of at the point where nobody's around to support those systems anymore. They have to be changed. We know we need to do certain things. So he's paying for the sins of the father, essentially, and he's not happy about it. And I did mention to him, well, we can say Agile is causing all these problems, but if you were supposed to release at the year end, now there's risk. Would you have known you had risk now in the old world? It didn't have an answer for that. So it kind of did what it needed to do. It exposed an ugly conversation that we needed to have sooner. And maybe that's good enough. Maybe we don't need to completely, we throw around this transformation word, but you look at this old way of doing things, and in the new world, you only need 60% of the people that work in your organization. What's going to happen to those people? Where should they go? But we don't spend a lot of time talking about the reorganization impact that Agile at scale has on transformations. Where are they going to go? I have one team that's working with 15 different project managers because there's 15 different lines of business they're supporting. So if they move to a value stream, where are the other 14 project managers going to go? Make stuff up for them to work on? Should they become Scrum Masters? Should they learn technical skills? Like, we don't talk about how, if you're in this large company, some people aren't needed anymore and they need to be bought out and they need to go. How do you do that?
Yeah, we've well, a lot of the work that we're doing with at least as part of our change management, it's filtering through the organization that, yes, there's going to be some significant changes.
Yeah.
But we actually have to get to that point. Getting rid of people is sort of going to happen as attrition over time.
Yeah.
But being able to actually effect the change in the first place to get the projects out the door requires working with other departments that don't actually necessarily embrace the model that you're moving towards.
Yeah.
They're trying to protect their patch. they're trying to get cross-funding to ensure that their little silo of government is maintained.
Yeah. The one of the techniques I like to use in these big organizations is, this is one of my favorite books, and not just because of what happened wherever in Kelly's video a little bit earlier.
What?
The
guys planned this?
The guy that walked in.
Oh, okay.
So he wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team as well. And this is about describing what's referred to as the naked consulting model. And these consultants, they come in, and one of their mantras is take the bullet for the client. Mm-hmm. So that's the notion of, I call it the get out of jail free card. So as the change agent, and I don't care if I'm internal or external, I can act sometimes as a megaphone to other parts of the organization for those problems. So one example where I was mentioning around how we've got all these different project tracking systems and 23 different Excel files with lists of projects, I don't think people at a high level in the organization tend to see those things. So when my VP asked me for, where's a list of all the Agile teams, and I explained to him, here's 30 lists, we don't know which one's the right one, he'll say, well, that's dumb. Why is that the case? I'm like, that's a good question. Why don't you tell me why we have this problem? So it becomes real to him or her or whoever it is. Mm-hmm. And then you can say, you know what, if we use system number 1 as where we're tracking our budget towards projects, I want that to be the single source of truth. Okay, great. So how do we get rid of all these other ones? And then it forces a conversation with a lot of people. And I had one person who was trying to change a risk process that affected 400 people. So he calls me up and says, well, you're the Agile guy, and how does Agile risk work? The VP of risk doesn't have enough data to make decisions about risk. So I said, okay, well, tell me how this happens today. And he tells me, and I said, how many people do that? About 400. Get all 400 of them in a room or on a call. What changes about their job? Oh, well, we can't do that. Well, why not? Well, because blah, blah, blah. And we get to the real heart of the problem, but it's basically, it's a process of inclusion and a process of co-creation at that size. And it's trying to drop the canoe in the white space of the org chart and help people connect to each other. Because normally they just don't see, or they don't realize there's probably 10 people in another division trying to do the same thing. So if we get them linked up, they at least have enough data to make a decision about how to change things, instead of, creating a framework and creating a bunch of rules and trying to force people to follow it. Because that's not how societies work. Societies evolve organically, and they evolve organically based on discovery. Where's the closest grocery store, right? Nobody comes to my house with a detailed map saying, here's the 8 steps you need to do to go buy your groceries. So is there a way that we can use models around how social change actually happens to help us deal with change at this scale? And it's real, people who value certainty and structure, they're like, what a bunch of nonsense. That's just a bunch of Agile hooey. But it works. There's a core set of questions that I always come back to is, who's asking for this and why are they asking for it? And how do you do this today? Where do you want to get to tomorrow? What would that look like? Who needs to be involved in those decisions? It's really getting back to coaching versus process consulting. And it does take longer. And there's fear with internal change agents I've worked with, that they have to show some type of deliverable or progress with the change. And, it's difficult sometimes because it's all in our heads. It's hard for me to talk to a VP and say, yeah, well, I talked to 35 people this week and we had some good conversations. He's like, great, what's different? We know how hard it's going to be now after this week. So I know it becomes hard for people who are inside organizations to do this, but that's what we do, is change people. We connect people together to have conversations.
So what are the things that you have found that help you make those connections, right? We talked earlier when we were setting this up about tapping into the intrinsic nature of people within your organization. And up until now, we've talked about the territorial, fear-based nature that's, this is, don't change this. This is how it works. How do you tap into the other side, the positive change side as a change agent in such a huge organization?
I had a recent story with real estate at this one organization that I'm working with, and they want to build agile spaces, of course, right? So it's a cube farm. They want to build collaborative spaces, and that's real estate's job. They come up with the plan, they come up with the budget, blah, blah, blah. So within a couple of days of starting there, I don't know how I found out about this. I think I mentioned it. Eventually, we want to get teams co-located together and stuff. And who's a real estate person? Oh, here, let me bring you and introduce you to this guy. So I said, hey, how's it going? I know our goal is to create some collaboration spaces at some point. So if you ever want to chat, let me know. And he goes, well, oddly enough, we are looking at some. I said, great. Let's go visit some of my other clients and you can go check out, see what some spaces look like, give you some ideas. Do you want to do that? And he loved it. He thought it was a great idea. Otherwise, he would have Googled Agile Team Space and he'd see those horrible, small, sweaty rooms that are more sweatshop based and just implement that. But if he has a chance to experience other environments, it's still his role and responsibility to build those spaces, but it's his idea. I'm just giving him options and people to talk to. I do a lot of connecting with people in other organizations. Here's the VP I worked with a couple of years ago. Go take them out for coffee and talk about how they've evolved Agile. So try to give people enough information where they can make a well-informed choice, but make it their choice, right? Like I'm sure we all see a lot of really dumb stuff in our organizations that we want to change, but it's not our responsibility to change it. It's our responsibility to explore possibilities with the people who make the decisions and let them choose. And that becomes a lot less frustrating. Like it took me a long time, like 6 years to learn that hard lesson. And you have to detach from the outcome because you don't own it. I'm not the CEO of this bank. I can't arbitrarily decide to throw away, 150-year-old processes. Mm-hmm. I can help them talk to other companies. I can tell them about Handelsbanken, which is, if you're familiar with the Global LAMP Index or Beyond Budgeting, they have 10 times the market cap with a third of the staff of the bank I'm working with now. And they've been operating with no fixed budget since 1970. So when I hear, oh, we're a big bank or a big telecom, we can't do that, I say, bullshit. These guys have been doing it for 40 years. What's your excuse? Or I'll say, you know what? I went and visited one of your competitors and they're kicking your ass with Agile. They've been at it for half the time and they've plowed down floors in their building and it makes them mad. And they're like, oh, well, we'll show them. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do in the white space to help people explore possibilities, but ultimately let them pick. It's their company.
Let's explore that some more. I'm excited to hear about how other people might have done that sort of thing. And in the white space, I like that. Does anyone else have that sort of experience where they?
Last one. I have it at a much smaller scale, but it must be tapping into the same human needs. Maybe like most coaches, you look at the situation and the path forward is so damn clear if they'd only follow it. And many times, every time it never works for me. And only recently has it become apparent that you can't pull people up the hill, right? You can show them a ladder, you can give them some climbing shoes, and you can paint them a picture of what it looks like on the other side, but they've got to do the work themselves. And you have to find something that is alluring enough that they're willing to go through the effort, because it's scary. Change is scary for anybody at any scale, at any age. Some of the things that have worked is making the pain so obvious and persistent that they're no longer numb to it, and they're willing to try something small that feels low risk to them, right? Present them with a couple of different experiments to try.
Yeah.
And invite it, not say, here, we're going to do this. It works a lot slower than I thought it would, and it takes a great deal of patience for me, but it does work instead of getting pushback. So at least we make some steps in the right direction.
Yeah, sometimes people just need time to kind of understand what it means. I started working with a smaller client a couple of weeks ago, and a friend of mine was coaching there about a year ago. And I'm saying all the same things she was saying a year ago, but they're ready to hear it now. So they tried a few things, and then she brought me in because she had another commitment, and I carried on the relationship with them. And I went in there a couple of weeks ago to talk about how they make decisions and stuff. And we introduced delegation board for Management 3.0. And they loved it. So they went from like a 4-page, very detailed RACI matrix and decisions to, 20 things on a delegation board, and made it a lot simpler. But they were ready to hear that message because they lived with the stuff that she taught them over a year. And then they adapted it to their context, and they figured out the things that worked and the things that didn't. And that takes time. My friends and I that work together, we like to say that you need to be the third coach or consultant group in there, because the first one's going to be the one that gets the blame for everything. It's going to be like, those idiots, they don't know what they're doing. And then the second group that goes in, they'll make some small little changes and some things will work. And the third people will come in and do nothing, but the people are ready to hear this exact same message that the previous two groups did. And then you're good. So
Yeah. Well, that's what they say in public speaking. You've got to tell them and tell them and tell them again.
Yeah.
And the third time it'll get through.
Yeah.
Actually, it speaks back to one of the original concepts in our agenda today. As I was saying, I'm focused. We have one of the tenets in our organisation, or at least in my part of the organisation, and how we communicate internally, because we get a lot of emails and all of the rest of it, is you may have heard this one, the what, so what, now what, condensing your emails into something brief and punchy. But it's now pervasive in that everybody is focused on the what, and process-wise on the how. They've often forgotten about the why. And we were talking very early before everybody joined. Is it Simon Sinek? He has a TED talk out there around. It's all about the why, or start with the why. And that particular thing is where I'm how I usually start my discovery sessions. And I'm not an Agile coach. I'm an Agile practitioner within large projects, and I've implemented using Agile methods. But I don't ever hope potentially I hope to join the ranks of coaching, but I've often had coaches. I don't currently have any coaches. But I'm faced with trying to remind everybody about the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? You present me with this process piece of paper to fill out. I'm challenging it and asking you why, because it doesn't necessarily fit what I have to achieve, my outcome. And your process, I understand that it's a process that you're doing. It's the what that you have to have, and this is how I have to work with you. But why? Does it support my ultimate outcome? And so on semi-daily basis, challenging people on the process, but also on the you asking me for a code so I can talk to you. What am I going to get for that too? So those are the sort of challenging the why, and as you said, being able to work between the white space in the organizational chart, in that it doesn't impact anybody's particular patch, but allows us to challenge what particularly might not fit the current organizational plan, because we're probably doing something different to what we have before. So we have to look outside what we're used to and distill it back to the why. What is the outcome that we hope to achieve by this? What is the organic social pattern, as you just described, that can help us work together in potentially a new way? So these are the sort of things that make it worth getting up early on a Saturday morning.
Yeah. It's hard in big companies too. I mean, when you look at one of the large organizations I'm working with now, they're the biggest in their space. Record profits year over year. So, why do we need Agile? We became number one and we have record profits without it. Why do we want to do this? And you could argue just the way society is evolving nowadays. I know people like to use that S&P 500 stat that organizations are dying off a lot faster than they used to, or they're merging, or Google, Facebook, Apple, and Twitter are buying everything out there. I think if you took the big 5 tech companies now over the last 10 years, they've bought over 1,500 companies or something. Mm-hmm. But, disruption, innovation, fintech in the case of banking, free Wi-Fi in the case of telecom, different government regulations I've seen in telecom that are forcing these organizations to change. There are external factors, of course, but are they really compelling enough? If you look at banking in Canada, for example, the big 5 account for, I think, 25% of the entire Canadian economy. And we like to say too big to fail, but what would really happen if fintech disrupted that industry? How would that really affect these big banks? Right now, the fintechs, they're kind of a mosquito on the arm of these big banks. And if they did nothing and operated the same way, would it really damage the business? It's hard to say. We don't know. Some people argue that in 20 years, all the major banks around the world won't do consumer banking anymore. That fintech will disrupt the consumer side of banking for simpler things, but capital markets type of stuff will never go away. So maybe these larger financial companies just sort of shift. So how do you put a purpose and a why and urgency to change behind something that big? Maybe it needs to be something else. Maybe it needs to be about, we don't want our people working 80 hours a week. So is it okay to say, you know what, we want to do Agile because, we have to be Agile or whatever it is. I don't like that argument either. But we want to change because we want to build a better workforce. We want to have happier people. So is that really the purpose? So say it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But how do you distill down urgency into an 80,000 person organization that drives the behavior for everybody day to day? That's challenging. So I always go in with the stance of how do we help you enjoy enjoy coming to work again? Mm-hmm. So try and change the big organization one person at a time, because they'll infect somebody else who will infect somebody else. And you guys have probably seen the same patterns, that the people who really love this Agile stuff are the first people that leave. So that if they don't feel the organization is supporting them, then they go somewhere else. And that cycle keeps repeating itself. For me, that's a win. And some people, it really changes their attitude. They figure out, what, there is a better way I can work here and stay here.
Can you elaborate on how it's a win? I lost that.
Well, I think it's better that somebody realizes that this isn't the organization for them and they want to go somewhere else. So if it wakes them out of their zombie-like slumber, somebody, I saw a tweet around zombie organizations. So people they come in on autopilot and they're, well, 7 more years to go till the pension kicks in or retirement or whatever it is. And that's sad. So if we can inspire people to either figure out how to love their job again or inspire them to go somewhere else, that's going to happen anyway. And for me, I think that's a win. One organization where the whole half the change team, quit within 3 weeks of each other. It took that to get the organization to actually move an abusive manager. So after a long period of time of coaching and actually getting HR involved and all that type of stuff, it took half the team walking out the door for them to move a manager that just, the manager wasn't a bad guy, it just wasn't a right fit. So sometimes that stuff needs to happen. The agile mindset argument that I hear a lot is, well, if everybody in this 80,000 person organization had the agile mindset, wouldn't we have a whole bunch of other different sets of problems to deal with? Like, we need that natural conflict, right? We need people who want the plan, and we need project managers who are structured and really good at organizing. And we need people who challenge that. So this natural friction is a good thing, but I think too often we see it as a bad thing. We see it as, well, we're not agile enough, or we're too rigid, or whatever it is. But it's those conversations between people who have different perspectives, I believe, is what moves us forward. And no scaling framework or scaling approach solves those. It comes down to conversations.
Absolutely. Collaborations, right? Opposing ideas that don't get watered down to ineffective ideas, but sharpen each other.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, we're coming close to the end. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about resources, places to go for support, because obviously we haven't solved all of Kelly's problems tonight. Nor mine.
I never
Jason,
expected
you're
that
going
to
back
happen.
on Monday with the same stuff, just a different day, right? And if it's not that client, it's the next client, right? So what has everybody found as a great place for support, resources for sharing ideas, sharing learning, tips, tricks, books? You mentioned one, Lencioni's, I love just about all of his titles. I haven't seen that one, Getting Naked, so I'll look that up. Is that new, Jason? Or
No, it's
old.
I got it, over 10 years ago, I think.
So it predates the 5 dysfunctions and the advantage and all that stuff.
It was either his second one or it was my glasses on. Where's
But you're still reading.
I'll find the date. Yeah,
It doesn't matter.
2010.
Yeah, Andy,
so 6 years ago.
Andy, can you type that in the chat so we can
Of course.
take a snap of the author?
Sure. And this is another one of my favorites.
Oh, okay.
It's backwards for me, so hopefully it's
Yeah.
This one for me is awesome. I've talked to Heather a few times, and it's it very much aligns with my belief that the way that we get these big organizations to change is first stop thinking that we can make them change, but just small, well-timed interventions. Like one of her things, and this is a very easy read. It's literally just a few paragraphs per thing.
Yeah.
And one of the 99 things is beg. So my certainty is greater than your doubt. You've hired me as the expert change or agile practitioner. You can blame the whole thing on me if it doesn't work. What have you got to lose is one of them. And sometimes that's going to get you over a really difficult hurdle. And this one's great because it's universal. Doesn't matter if it's an agile change or if it's a reorg or if it's something else. And I don't get any extra, marketing fees or anything for promoting it. But every big company I go into, I buy a pile of these and give them to people.
Does it make any difference if you're in, a consultant or in-house?
For me, no. It's a matter of how safe you feel. So when I've been an internal employee as a change agent, I get permission to run amok. So I say, you know what, my job is to help change. So sometimes I might be a little pushy or a little forward, or honestly, probably a bit annoying sometimes, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't challenging the status quo. So you get permission to do that, but it's hard. If you're you're reporting through the hierarchy and you're having your performance managed by the same HR group.
Yeah.
You run a few risks that way for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so how would you recommend to beg for an Agile coach? Begging is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. Well, who would decide? Who would pay for it? Paying for coaching is often the hardest thing, because if it's coming out of project budget, would they rather have 3 more features or a coach?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm, again, what I'm facing.
Yeah. Help the decision makers see the impact. So the impact of not having one.
But that's over time.
Yeah, and you have to have some pointed examples of failure that a lot of people won't necessarily be able to document.
Yeah.
Bye. Enjoy the dentist. Okay, we're nearly done here. Bye. Yeah, so I'm finding that that's probably a hard sell if I don't have the data to back it up.
Right. Alternative is, try and Jerry Weinberg has he calls the rule of 3s. So until you have 3 things you could try, you have no options. You have 1 thing, you have nothing. You have 2, you have a choice. You have 3, you have options. So what's an alternative to hiring a coach? What are 2 alternatives?
Yeah, continue as we currently are, in that we've got trained and certified iteration managers and practitioners within the program. And that runs its risk. The option is potentially to snaffle coaches from other departments and see if we can borrow them temporarily, I guess. I think there's coaches that have been deployed by other programs. Maybe they're full-time. Maybe they can take on some I don't know.
If you could construct a small experiment that was low risk, low cost, and because it's small, potential small gain, but definitely a demonstrable win, could you do that through borrowing a coach?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah,
might be a way. Good. Yep. So we got about 2 minutes left. Are there any final topics that you want to bounce around with Jason before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate all of the ideas, and I guess it's the inspiration to keep pushing that rock uphill.
Yeah.
That's great.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jason.
Thank
you want to close us out? Any thoughts?
I guess only that anything at scale, whether it's agile or change, it doesn't always need to be as complex as we make it out to be.
I like that. Keep it simple. Thank you, everybody. Give us a day or so, and we'll share links to this for reference, and we'll include somehow, some way, some show notes, those book titles, and anything else that bubbles up for us. Jason, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, thanks for joining us. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Jason.
Take care.
Thanks all. Bye.